Hello, friends. Tattooed Biker here with you, and welcome back to Freakish Fridays. As we go sailing into this weekend, I have a 4-story collection of personal, paranormal experiences for you, sent in by viewers. It's an awesome mixed bag of ghostly strangeness that I think you'll really enjoy. So let's get right into it. Now kick back and enjoy the ride. Number 1. Hey TB, I have a story from when I was a kid, and I love hearing people's thoughts on it, so I thought I'd send it to you. So I was like 5 or 6 at the time, living with my parents and our dog, B. My dad was working nights, so it was just B, my mom, and me that night. We were getting ready for bed, and my mom asked me to go turn off the living room light. The layout of the house was kind of weird, but the main part, I guess, was pretty much 2 squares, with the smaller square, containing the living room, sitting inside the larger square, a big hallway around the living room. I leave the kitchen and walk around the big hallway to get to the living room, and I hear my mom say something, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. So I walk further, around the corner, and I see her leaning on B's kennel. It's dark, with the only light coming from the living room entryway, so I just saw her silhouette down the hall. So being a kid, I walk up to her, looking down at the carpet and talking about something. When I get there, I look up, and I'm like 2 feet away from this white figure. It's not my mom. It was completely opaque and just standing there, looking at me while I was looking at it. It didn't have eyes or a nose or anything, but I knew it was looking at me. I vividly remember seeing a head, arms, shoulders, hands, and a torso. It almost looked like it was glowing because the edges had a kind of hazy look. But other than that, it looked just like a whole person. I stood there for maybe 3 seconds and ran towards my room, down a smaller hallway where my mom was waiting. She asked me something like, "Where were you?" or "What were you doing?" But that's really all I remember about the experience. Has anyone else seen something like this before? I haven't seen anything like it since, and whatever it was, it didn't seem malicious or mean. I honestly feel kind of comforted when I think back on it. Of course, it could have just been my imagination, honestly, since I was only in the 1st or 2nd grade. But it was so crisp and clear and frightening when I saw it, I do kind of doubt that it was something that my mind produced. I just wanted to see what you or your listeners thought. Signed, Heather. Number 2. Hey Biker, this story happened 15 years ago, but I will always remember it like it was yesterday. My grandfather passed away when I was only 12 years old. He was my father figure because my dad wasn't in the picture. My mother and I lived with him and my grandmother, so it hit me really hard when he passed. The night after he died, I slept in my grandmother in his room to make sure that she wouldn't feel lonely. I was sleeping on his side of the bed, which was right next to their master bathroom. I remember waking up nauseous and immediately bolting for the toilet. As I'm in there, I faintly hear what sounds like someone dragging their bare feet on wooden floors. I look into the bedroom, and my grandmother is still asleep, and I don't see anything out of the ordinary. I must be hearing things. I finish up in the bathroom, and I'm about to head back to the bedroom when I remember that my grandfather dragged his feet when he walked. I don't think anything about it and get back into bed. Just as I'm about to fall asleep, I heard the sound again. Feet dragging on the floor. Except this time it sounded like it was just a few feet away from me. Out of reaction, I look in the direction of the sound, and there he is, standing in the doorway to the hallway with one hand on the doorframe and the other over his heart. He was looking at me, and when we made eye contact, he smiled. I smiled back and then pulled the covers over my head and eventually went to sleep. The next morning when I woke, I remembered what had happened and told my mom. After hearing everything, she told me that I needed to tell my grandmother what had happened. So I do, and come to find out, she had seen him when I did. She had woken up as I was getting back into the bed, and when she heard feet dragging the floor, she looked and saw him standing there. She says they just smiled and stared at each other before he waved, turned around, and vanished, walking back down the hallway. Signed, Will. Number 3. Dear Tattooed Biker, so I'm a pretty logical person, and I really just lurk these types of channels and not really even comment unless it's got to do with pharmacy or medical things. But I've had an experience of when I was a child that keeps creeping up recently, and it has me wondering what it was I saw. I am pretty skeptical, but open to the idea that paranormal and even interdimensional entities can or do actually exist, but I always try to debunk why, or if paranormal things happen, like weird sounds or bumps and the like. Anyways, when I was around 10 to 13 years old, I can't really remember the exact age, my sister and I were playfully chasing each other around the house, playing hide and seek, and it was my turn to count and go look for her. I returned to the living room, like a den but with wider space. And this room was where the base or safe spot was when the hider tries to avoid you. I finished up counting, and as I was saying, ready or not, here I come, I remember getting this feeling overcome me, like I was being watched. I whipped my head around to look behind me, and there, in one of the corners of the room, was a short, probably about 4 feet tall, pale, cloaked but no hood covering their facial features, scared-looking bald man, staring at me, huddled in the corner like they were afraid, and surprised that I was able to see them. It definitely wasn't human, from what I can remember, and I was able to discern quickly in my head that it presented male-like qualities and features. I didn't feel any malevolence from this being or ill intentions, but as quickly as I blinked after seeing it, the entity was gone, and I remember being confused for a bit, but my brain went back to just wanting to play. I do recall avoiding that spot in the corner for a while, and feeling scared to get close to it. And when my mom asked what was going on with why I was acting wary of that corner, and I told her about the figure, she said that it could have been my imagination, and I left it at that. I'm not sure why this is bothering me lately, but just wondering if anyone has had a similar experience, or maybe know any legends or myths about a small, pale, hunched-over, cloaked, and scared-looking bald man in the corner, although it certainly could have been just a child's imagination. Thanks for reading. Signed, Mason. Number 4. Dear TB, this is my only paranormal experience, and it was about 30 years ago, and it remains the only one that I've ever had. I, along with 2 other friends, moved into an old Californian-style bungalow. It was built around 1910 and was a 3-bedroom house. We were all about 25 years old at the time. It was located in the inner city and had an adjoining massive workshop and shed that used to be a mechanic shop and petrol station, with a petrol bowser on the footpath back in the 1920s. The monthly rental was quite cheap for the area and the size of the block, although the workshop was used for storage now. The owner had left a fair bit of junk in it. One night around 8 p.m., I was sitting in my bedroom at the desk, which was next to the door, which was open, and this opened into the main hallway. At the right of my door was the main entrance to the house. From the outside and across there was another bedroom, and to the left the hall split in two directions. One to the lounging room, and the other went back into the kitchen. The kitchen was at the back of the house, and also had the back door, which led into the backyard, and across the yard was the massive old mechanic shed. Because we lived in the inner city, our security was pretty good. The back door had 3 deadbolts and a chain latch. It was always locked as it was winter and the backyard was wet and muddy. Both of my housemates were out that night. I was playing a game on my PC when I see a guy walk down the hall about 5 feet in front of me. I call out, "Hey." He then stopped briefly, turned his head ever so slightly. He was wearing blue jeans and a red patterned shirt. He seemed to be about 20 years old. Had lovely blonde shoulder-length hair. As I was playing a game, I didn't fully engage with him, but when I noticed he stopped, I then said, "How's it going?" And then I returned to viewing the monitor with the game I was playing. I thought it was a friend of one of my housemates and expected to see one of them walk past shortly after. But no one did. This guy may have looked at me, but since I returned my gaze back to the screen, I'm not 100% sure. Then he just slowly walked down the hall and back out into the kitchen. I then realized that I never heard the front door open, and all of a sudden, every hair on my body sharply rose up. I called out hello, and still got no response. So I then walked into the kitchen to see who this guy was, and there was no one back there. He couldn't have gone back out without me seeing him, and the back door had 3 locked deadbolts on it. I was shocked, but curious as well. I spent the next half an hour walking around the house, out the backyard and in the shed, still finding no one. A week later, I went across the road from our house to the barber shop to get a haircut. The barber had been in business for generations, and his father before him had ran the business. I told him the story, and he called his father in from out of the back of the shop. His father told me that back in the 1940s, when the mechanic shop was in full operation, a young man was working under a car which was on a hoist when it malfunctioned, and the young man was unfortunately killed. Quite a few previous residents have seen the same young man in the house, and when they did, they had gotten scared and moved out. That's why the rent was so cheap. We stayed for another 2 years, but I never saw him again. I was so disappointed. I would have loved to have seen him again, and even tried to communicate. I, unfortunately, have never seen anything paranormal since. As far as ghosts go, this was completely believable. He had solid form. He acknowledged me when I spoke to him by stopping and turning his head. I just wish that I'd kept looking at him more, and I wish I had more encounters like that. 1 per lifetime is way too few. Not fair, and I kind of feel like I've been ripped off, you know. Signed, Barry. And there it is. All I have for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. If you have an unexplained experience, be it paranormal, supernatural, or just plain weird that you'd like to share, write it out to me, and maybe it will end up in a future video. My email address is in the description. So have a great weekend, and as always, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker, out.